Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Bonner.
And Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we cover Thor by Jason Aaron.
The God of Thunder.
Yes. In excitement and preparation for the upcoming Thor God and Thunder movie that comes out this weekend. And we're so excited to be talking about it and excited that some of Jason Aaron's run from Thor, his epic run that he did, this 20 volume epic storyline that's bigger than life. We're excited to start talking about that because we've been dying to cover it.
7 years of stories.
7 years.
That's how long it's got.
What is when you're thinking about a 7-year run? Nobody does that really anymore. It was the thing, probably prior to the mid 2000s, I guess, maybe.
I mean, you look at Brubaker on Captain America, or some of the other, or on Daredevil, and who was Jeff Johns on Green Lantern?
Those are some of the big.
There's
big
just
runs.
a few that have gone over 5 years, I think.
You're starting to be able to count those down.
Yeah.
So for this to be able to start to talk about it, it's a big challenge to us, but we're gonna try to pump it up a bit. Yeah.
Kind of distill it all down into what was the comics and what we're kind of looking forward in the movie. The movie's coming out this weekend. We're excited to see it.
And Thor is the first, or at least for a solo series. This is the first Marvel run movie series that had 4 movies.
Oh yeah.
And he's been in I think total of 9 movies.
Even Chris Hemsworth was I didn't expect to play Thor this long, but
yeah, which is awesome. And I don't think he's
keep him on.
Opposed the idea to not do it. I think he's I'll be part of it. Sure.
Well, I don't know. Captain America passed his shield, and now do you think Thor is passing?
Yeah, I mean,
passing something.
We'll see. One original member of the core Avenger group, I guess, still involved.
Yeah,
things
I mean, you can't have Thor go away because even this story kind of picks up on that part of the storyline, is that there will always be a Thor. Absolutely. That's what they're saying. Thor is a part of the pantheon. He's the god of thunder. There will always be a Thor. It's kind of like saying, well, we're gonna just not have the oceans. There's always has to be.
It's like a fundamental part of the Marvel universe.
Yes, is a force of nature.
For sure. And, it's still super awesome to see that Thor is a part of the Marvel universe and stuff. And his comics are still relevant today. Thor came out in August of 1962. So we're getting on the 60-year anniversary. Wow. Yeah. And it came out in Journey into Mystery when it was called like that. Journey into Mystery 83. So it's pretty cool how Donald Blake, that was the God of Thunder. He tapped his stick and said, I am God of Thunder. Whoever's worthy to hold this hammer is now the God of Thunder.
He was the original and
Mjolnir.
Break away from the superheroes. Because if you think about when that was coming out, Kirby and Stan Lee and everyone still was writing, actual typical standard superheroes. And then they had to jump their mind over into mythology and just totally different scenery, totally different characters, and just figure out how do we write someone that's not human but still human, sort of.
Exactly. And Norse mythology in the sci-fi world, or magic, or in comics, it wasn't really explored at that time. So it was cool to start seeing what those ideas look like and how can we adapt those to.
Well, and I always thought it was kind of cool. Once they said, all right, we're going to start writing about established gods that are part of the human mythology. They weren't just making up the Hulk, and they weren't making up Spider-Man. They were saying, okay, now we're going to actually say that these gods are real and they're in the Marvel universe. Yeah. I mean, there comes a point, remember Hercules was in the Avengers and things. Yeah, it's there just comes
a little bit of an afterthought.
Yeah.
Oh wait, we should have let's do the Greek pantheon too.
Let's put them in there too.
Yeah.
So I at least saying, hey, you know what? We're gonna bring a part of our Earth, our actual mythology as humans, and saying now it's also going to be in Marvel Comics world. I thought that was kind of weird.
Thor's been running ever since. He hasn't had too many breaks. There's been such great writers as Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on it. Walter Simonson
Oh,
has a remarkable run on the character that
probably. Yeah, he wrote for a long time
yeah,
too,
he wrote for a very long
forever.
time. Yeah, there's a great omnibus out of that. Dan Jurgens is another name that comes to mind. He had a very grandiose, and him and um, there's a couple other writers during that time that they did like a Ragnarok story, which was inspired by the last movie.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
so it's been cool to see all these ideas from all these writers that have touched Thor just coming to the big screen and being celebrated for their work. Even though they maybe should get a little more credit for what they did, it's still really cool to see that. And now Donny Cates is like on it, and
Yeah.
he's doing his whole weird thing, and everybody likes to play in that sandbox.
So what we want to do for this podcast is number one, talk about the storyline that is somewhat taken from the comics and translated into the screen. Most of the Marvel movies are somewhat related to actual comic book storylines,
Yes,
even if they just
adapted.
picked a little piece here, taken a little part there.
Sure.
A lot of TV shows and even movies that have come out for uh, like the CW and DC Comics things. I always have people ask like, "What part of this is in the comics?" It's like, well,
A little bit
a
of
little
this, a
bit,
little
yeah.
bit
I mean,
that. It was
most
kind
of those
of,
characters are 60 to 80 years old. So to
Sure.
say, what part of a Batman comic was taken into this movie, it's like there's a lot of history. There's a
for sure.
lot to take from. But it appears that this next Thor movie, Thor Love and Thunder, is almost directly taken from this main Jason Aaron storyline, obviously with Gorr,
Yeah,
the God Butcher.
exactly. And the biggest thing, I guess, their Marvel's good job, or at least the MCU's good job of like rolling over, like, hey, we're gonna continue these plot threads from the last movie or the last time you saw Thor, and then we're gonna bring them back. We're gonna wrap up those plot lines and kind of transition to where he's going next. Which last time we seen him was like hanging out with the Guardians of the Galaxy at like the end of Endgame because he was doing like some soul searching.
Yeah.
So
Well,
and he's we get to see him in the trailer as Fat Thor still, or Bro Thor, or however you want to call it, and just kind of finding his place in the world again because obviously Ragnarok happened, Endgame happened, his world's been turned upside down.
yeah, and I I think Thor, when they first came out with Ragnarok, everyone was like, "What the heck is this?" Like
Yeah.
it took such a big leap from the character as far as like the seriousness of the character,
Absolutely,
like what
like
you
the
thought it would
director
be.
Taika Waititi, or
Yeah.
however you call it,
Taika Waititi.
Yeah, that's not better pronunciation. He did such a great job of reinvigorating that character because
Yeah.
there's been a couple other directors that were trying to stay true to the mythology part, which was great, but the MCU itself around they like that humor approach, but they also like expanding that world. Like, how
Yeah.
can we
Good
make
point.
it
I
bigger
mean,
than
if
life?
they really, really pushed the like mythology part of it and like made it like a
Yeah.
Clash of the Titans kind of thing,
Right, that's almost
I-
going back to the classic Thor.
yeah, I think that would have
It was good
kinda-
for one movie, and they tried to do it in a second movie, and there was some good elements to it, but really audiences weren't like,
I think it would have alienated a
Yeah.
lot of people. It would just be like the wrong tone.
yes.
They kind of want Marvel movies to be a little lighter.
yeah.
Some of the other movies out are a little darker, so they're like, okay, let's just make this as not playful, but sort of like if he wants to take on human characteristics, you would imagine that he would have taken on the sort of free for all feeling of humans and just not be so serious. I
Absolutely.
suppose.
And that character development, it has to grow from somewhere.
Yeah.
And it also has to be relatable to people.
And
as
Chris
well.
Hemsworth did a great job. So-
Absolutely. I can't think of many other people who would, keep with that role and be true to it. So he's awesome.
So this storyline actually starts. Where do I have here? Where do I have Thor: God of Thunder
Yes.
#1, which was 2015?
Sure.
Am I right
and
with
I guess
that?
just as we're going into it, how did you read this comic, Reynolds?
So I kind of like pieced it together. So the biggest thing with this is, it's gained popularity and it's been pretty popular as a comic book for at least 3 years now, like pretty solid, right? Because they really started collecting. Even when it first came out, it was obviously really popular. But then as they started coming out with different formats, collectors like us were like, well, what's the best way to collect? Because they kept coming out with different ways to do it.
Right.
They're like, here's just regular trade paperbacks, and here's single issues, and digital, and complete collection, and how about the Marvel?
Right. Yeah. This
Uh,
series was first starting
it
to
was
come
a
out in
lot.
2013.
Yeah, so they just
So it
pieced it
just
all
trying
over.
to get it all together.
And that the omnibus for this, which is we always like to talk about the omnis, is that hey, get your omnibus if you can. Um, the omnibus for this didn't even come out till like last year, right?
No, it just came out this last month. The first omnibus
Oh,
did.
oh, oh, yeah, the
Yes.
1,200-page one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And that, that took so long to come out, and Marvel's been kind of toying around with the idea of doing it. The community finally said, "Hey, where is this?" And I think just because the movie was coming out and there's still a lot of publicity and a lot of respect for Thor, they're like, "Oh, we'll finally put it out." But right now, that omnibus is like people are just nabbing it up left and right. So if you can get a copy, absolutely go for it.
yeah,
And I read this as the little standard hardcovers they put out, the premium hardcovers they call them. It was a good way for them to promote their digital product and still give you a hardcover. They each cover like 6 issues a piece, and I have 11.
I read. I have the complete collection, volume
Which is
1.
also another way to go.
Yeah,
Good way to
it's a
collect it.
paperback, but it's also has 18 issues in it, so it's
Yeah,
a
so a
pretty
lot of
thick
bang for your
paperback.
buck. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
it's priced at $40, but it's Thor: God of Thunder 1 through
Yeah,
18.
and either of these ways, whatever is affordable and a way to pick up the book and just read it, I think you should go for it. I think we both recommend this series.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and then I read the other majority of it on Comixology,
Yeah.
which was just more accessible for me, and it's a little more portable, so I was able to read it on and off, and
Exactly.
at night and
Yeah.
things, and it just
Or
makes
like
it a
if you
little
don't
easier.
have every single little collection or completed collection, it's still good to interweave, digital.
Yeah, and that's if we
With
could
such
take
a
it.
big series, I mean, it'll take a little bit for the whole series to come out in omnibus format, but
Yeah, and for most of this too, like I always kind of like to spread the idea of if you want to read a run, like you see a storyline like I don't know, like Hickman's
yeah,
Adventures or
Avengers,
something.
sure.
I always tell people don't wait till every little piece is in play. I know a lot of people are
Yeah,
like real completists and they want to make sure they have everything lined up exactly, and then they're like, I'm going to
sure.
read this pile now, and it's exactly how it should be.
Yeah,
But, start reading it, then, get it digital. Stop by your library. Be surprised. The
yeah,
library has a tremendous amount of books. Try to see what
absolutely.
that is. Do a little research, find something at, maybe online, or,
Hoopla is a great resource we'd
yeah.
recommend.
And
That's through your
so
library.
it's okay to kind of read it like that if you don't mind jumping formats, obviously,
Yeah,
but
or if you just
you
want to
get the
see
story.
what the feel of it is, what the pacing is like, what the writer voice is on the art, definitely a great way to try it
Just
out.
jump in, just start
Yeah,
it.
X
Yeah.
Men's kind of like that too. Or you could there's oh
Yeah.
here's
It's
the
like, where do we
X-Men. Where do you
start? Oh my
start?
gosh.
Just pick a place and start. And then you can always go back and forth too.
So in Thor number 1,
Yes.
you are introduced to a young Thor, a Thor from long ago,
Yes.
which is really, really cool to see. Is that right away they put it in your mind that Thor, I don't want to say eternal, but like Thor was at one time a young Thor.
Yeah, this is 893 AD
Yeah,
in Earth, the western coast of Iceland. So
yeah,
we're embracing Thor's Viking and Nordic roots.
and he is sort of leading a team of adventurers, and it's kind of cool because he has like Stormbreaker. He has like an old long handled axe that he's using,
Yeah,
and
yeah, Yarnborn. That
yeah,
name I can say.
and he just acts younger. And everything he does is like um, fearless and just jumps in.
Sure.
And so you get the idea right away that Thor has built a reputation amongst these Nordic raiders in the Baltic Sea, that they're like, no, nothing can stop Thor. And this is the first time he runs into Gorr, the God Butcher.
Yeah, and this was kind of warning of like there was a fellow god that he kind of knew distantly that was like, oh, we can't. What do you see when you look into his eyes? He was a god. And then, but he was also like killing all these gods, and he's like, did you know so and so? Yep, they're gone. So he's like, oh, this is a big problem.
Yeah, so Gorr is just one of those villains that just shows up out of nowhere, and
Enough to build a funeral pyre.
yeah, and there's nothing that Thor really. I mean, Thor's really actually fighting for his life at that point.
Yeah, when he's young,
Um,
a challenge that's a pretty big challenge for him, and he's like, "Oh, I can handle this." And he's very
he always just jumps headfirst in everything anyway.
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now for Gore, his look I thought was cool. He's kind of got like what like almost a kangaroo back legs, sort of. You
Yep.
know, like you'd see like devilish back legs that have sort of that like
Right.
reverse kneecap, like big wide feet, and he has uh, black, just inky black all over him. As you realize, that's part of like his power.
Yeah, his weapon. Yeah.
Yep, that he can kind of control. And so it's not just him, which he mostly looks like. I mean, he doesn't have any armor or anything like that, but
Nope.
he's mostly just like a naked monster.
Alien. Yeah. The
He's
running joke on
humanoid.
the internet is he resembles Baltimore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I and that's why I guess in the movie they decided not to like erase his nose because
Yeah.
they didn't
Even
want to
though in the
like
comic is like,
look
eh.
Voldemortish.
Yeah, and he's played by Christian Bale, which is super great to see Christian Bale come into the Marvel
Yes.
MCU and do like a villain role on top of that. That's huge.
Yeah. And for him to add his acting, that's gonna
Yeah.
be awesome.
Well, yeah, I can't wait.
So Thor, so it's kind of you could also right away the first issue it jumps forward in time, back in time, forward in time,
Yes.
present day, and it says like many millennia from now, and you're like, oh wow, okay,
Right. So Jason Aaron, he's starting out by introducing us to young Thor. That's very rambunctious and carefree and everything. Modern day Thor, where he's kind of wise and everything.
modern day Thor has Mjolnir at this time,
Mjolnir, yep. And then far distant future Thor, which is King Thor at that time.
and he's
Kind of at the end of the
missing
world.
his eye, you know, like
Yeah.
Odin, and
Yep.
he's very old, but you can
And
tell
super
he's just
wise,
got
battle
that.
hardened, and kind of almost a defeatist attitude. And it takes a lot for him to overcome that.
Yeah, he's got like that 1,000 mile stare of,
Yeah,
just
which
like
is
people coming
super
back
cool
from
because he kind
war.
of took on the characteristics of his father, but also kind of just going through all of his experiences. I don't want to be my dad, but I am my dad. But I am his son. So he's kind of falling into some of those tropes that he went through.
And you do get the idea that as a god, like um there could be something out there that's stronger than gods.
Yeah.
And you know,
Which is
would
above
that
and
be a
beyond
villain?
anybody's
Yeah,
thinking or
right.
comprehension. You start getting like cosmic level.
Yeah, yeah. You're like, would that be a villain? Would that be, but if someone really was stronger than the gods pantheon and decided that he was sick of gods
Yeah.
trying to rule the
Yeah, that was
galaxies,
kind of the
was the
big
idea.
selling point of this villain was he doesn't like religion. He thinks gods are overrated, and because something happened to him in his past, we won't spoil that for you. But he's been wronged. He's like, oh, I'm fed up. I'm gonna kill them all. So it's like, whoa, that's pretty dark.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's jumping all over time too, which is kind of cool that
Yeah,
he at least hooks up with the time lords and kind of
yeah.
realize. So you get the idea that he is really, really smart. So he's not just like a
Not thinking on
tank, he's
a
just
very.
not
He's not a one dimensional villain. He's
right.
thinking about the long game.
Yes. And thinking about like how can I really effectively stop this from ever happening?
Right. He's very meticulous. He's just a great villain that Thor needed because eventually you get sick of like fighting Loki, Hela, um, uh, like the Berserker guy, yeah, the Executioner, and Surtur and things like that. So it was really cool that Jason Aaron came up with his own villain and figured out
Mhm.
a new angle that you can introduce to Thor.
Well, and that's I think what was so enticing to the movies portion of it because
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
movie they not only want to get someone that is an intellectual villain,
Yeah.
but one that's somewhat humanoid. So you're not just like fighting like this, the darkness or the
Yeah.
void or something.
Right. Yeah.
Like you still want to actually connect with a being that you can at least maybe reason with or a little bit. Like
Sure.
everyone likes the villain
And I'm
that
sure it'd
like
be a little
is really close.
Shakespearean, having that
Yeah.
conversation, which will be great between Hemsworth and Christian.
Yeah, there's always a thing you see that like sometimes people start like siding with the villain, so they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, we got to change the,
Yeah.
change the plot point here and have them like do something really terrible."
Absolutely. So it was so cool just to see that dialogue, and this doesn't just end in one fight. They fight for like 2 to 3 volumes at least, and it really challenges Thor and makes him work harder. It's the classic trope of he
Yeah.
has to work harder than he's ever worked before. He's got to find a new way to kill his enemy.
Yeah. So
It
and he's
really
always
is.
like, "Where is the butcher of gods?" He's just always saying that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely, and he even gets, like, PTSD, like, from fighting him. He's like,
yeah.
"Oh," because that's I think his future self is like, "Oh, I tried to defeat him. I can't. I'm scared of him. If I do anything, he's gonna come after me," and, it takes a lot for those guys to get together and do something.
So, to me, when I'm reading through a comic, I always try to think of like, what is the overarching theme?
Right.
What's the feeling that they want you to get? Because obviously, it's cool to have some battles in there, and it's cool to have characters that we know. But like for this one, it was like number one, what does it mean to Thor? Like if
Absolutely.
other gods are dying, what does he care?
Sure.
And it's just kind of like, even though Thor is Asgardian and he's also human and he cares about all of Midgard and he cares about all of the, on the same token, he's he is a god, and that's
Yeah.
like puts him in another whole category
Sure.
that he cares about. It's kind of like saying like you're a doctor, and if someone started like hunting doctors, you would be like, "Oh no, like
Yeah.
I'm a doctor." And so
Sure.
he's like saying he needs to stop this. It's just inherently Thor that he
Sure,
needs to stop
and
it.
I also picked up that maybe he's facing his own morality because he thought he was so tough and
Mm.
immortal and not a lot of things could hurt him. And so just to humble him a bit, I think that addressed that issue.
Yeah. There
And
really wasn't ever a point where Thor was I, you know, Thor always uses brute strength, just like,
yeah,
Hulk and a lot of other things.
he's a big Hulk smash
Yeah.
fan.
He's like, so I'm just going to jump in. And then to say that, like, that's not working and
Yeah,
you need to figure out another way. It is cool to see that he does figure out another way, but at the same time, um, I guess you get the idea that he at one time felt unworthy.
yep.
And that's like, I guess
That's a whole nother.
that's the catalyst. You
Yep.
have to think about that too. It keeps it in the back of his head. That's
Yeah.
in the movie. They're addressing that too. That Thor feels unworthy.
Yep.
From the last
Exactly.
movie, he couldn't keep Asgard safe, and that
Yeah.
that weighs on him.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely, I think that was start of like Infinity War and Endgame. That was such a big issue
Hmm.
on his mind. That's why he left Earth. He's like, I gotta go find myself again, and things like that. But another cool thing I liked in the first two, like the first storyline, is that they address prayers to Thor
Oh,
and
right.
things like that, and kind of going back to his his Viking roots and how as younger Thor. And I mean, not so much in modern day, but when that was still a big thing, like people would pray to their gods, and their gods might answer. Well, Thor would just join in on. He would help out. He's like, "Hey, all right," and he'll be a Viking and live it up with the crowd and everything after he goes on his quest or things like that, asking for help. But I like that throughout Jason Aaron's thought run, he's addressing those younger Thor days or that mythology aspects of it, and kind of builds some background, whether it's all factual or kind of just made the feel for comics. It was a cool angle that he went with because he didn't have to do that, but it
Yeah.
makes it flesh out the character.
Well, and it kind of shows too that even though um, pantheons of gods, whether they're Greek, whether they're um, Aztec
Yeah,
or you know European or anything like that, that there becomes this sort of ebb and flow a little bit. There's like a timeline that they follow, and for Thor to sort of fall out of thought for a while doesn't mean
yes,
that he was fall out of like favor. It
yeah,
just means that people weren't actively thinking about him,
hmm,
but some parts of the world were.
yeah,
So uh, to say that you need this constant worship, it was not like a big issue. It was mostly just saying that, you believe there's protectors out there for you,
Yeah,
and he doesn't want to like lose that part of it.
absolutely.
And he always saw himself as he could never lose. He was always, the top of the, like I'll jump in and everything will be
Sure.
good. So when Gore kind of like put him in his place,
Yeah,
he's like, oh, well now, you put a little doubt into someone. It's
exactly.
like someone who's bulletproof and they go through the whole life bulletproof, and then one day a bullet passes through them and they're like,
Oh,
oh, what
their
happened?
their their
Yeah.
foundation is shaken.
Yeah,
They're
right. And
shook.
it's like hard to snap out of that.
Yeah, so it definitely challenged Thor in all aspects, and I think that was really cool of Jason Aaron to just come up with that. Before we move on to the next part, I want to touch really quick on the artist that was on this first run, Assad Ribic.
Yes.
Oh,
Awesome.
Assad Ribic. I don't know if he did much before this run, but it was definitely highlighted.
Yes. Just
And
awesome.
it's such a brilliant style. How would you describe it?
So it's like you almost get I guess I want to go back to, I don't want to reference too many things outside
It's
of this
okay.
podcast, but like Love and Robots, there's like
Yeah, I love
there's
that show.
like
Yep, yep.
CG, and the CG idea is that some CG, uh even in like the Marvel movies, some of it is like trying to blend into reality. So they use
Yeah.
it really subtly and you don't
Mhm.
even notice it, right?
Yeah.
Like when people are driving down the street and there's like cars that are CG'd in, like you don't even think about it. You just think
Yeah.
like they're real cars, right? But then when you try to draw something that's like totally foreign or something that's totally out of this world, sometimes it just sticks out because it's like it's too foreign, right? This art, I think, is like borderline realistic. You kind of fall into like
Yeah.
the characters and the expressions and you forget that it's comic book art a little bit.
Right.
He's trying to ride that line of like realistic anatomy versus
Yes.
like lighting and darkness, and like
Yeah.
the colors are all, I mean, whoever's the colorist on this is
Yeah.
amazing too.
We have Dean White and
Yeah,
Ive
because
Strakovia or whatever.
that
Yeah.
makes a huge difference in this. So this art is not traditionally like inked. There's not
Yes.
like black,
Right.
it's just mostly the colors that filled in. There's no like crazy outlines to it.
That's
It's
true.
just
Yeah.
one color block going up against another color block, and it just works. It just works
Right.
really,
And
really
his
good.
covers are like, I don't know, movie worthy or
Yeah.
whatever, or very cinematic and kind of sets the tone of what you're going to read, but they're
I
like,
mean,
they're so
I mean,
cool
if you
looking.
look at his covers, they're not black outlines of everything. They didn't get like a
No.
Sharpie and just sort of go around every line. It's like they used the environment to just sort of build it in your head.
And
It's
it
so
sets this
good.
perfect tone of just giving you this authentic feel of this Viking and North like mythology feel, and just does really well like the contrast between Thor and Gore. Um,
And his fight scenes are really, really great too,
yeah,
because it's just constant movement and
yeah,
just they don't. It's not even like actual bolts of thunder. It's like just
yeah,
lights and movement.
this scene here. It's like
Yeah,
almost a page separation,
yeah. No, it's
which is really unique to see that.
honestly, look up some panels of it. And then occasionally it shows like some of the pencils behind it. So it is kind of cool to see. It's almost like a watercolor effect. You pick up some
Yeah.
of the background shading, and you can see that someone really took their time. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
it is great. I'm
Very
glad you
well
mentioned
thought
that.
out, in great detail, and all the characters are really distinct as well. So, kudos to Assad Rebic. He was one of the first artists that were on this line. So, love it. And then I guess that's a part of this long epic journey of uh, Jason Aaron's Thor. And after the end of this part, we start introducing the story of Jane Foster.
Yes.
And so Jane Foster, as you may know from movies, is Natalie Portman's character, and her and um, Doctor Blake, the original Donald Blake. That's
Donald
it.
Blake.
I was getting there. Thanks. Donald Blake and Jane Foster. They were like the first starting characters in Thor's series, and they are they weren't like involved or anything, but they were kind of boyfriend girlfriend a little bit, kind of this teasing romance over issues and issues and issues and things like that. On and on again, off again. So it was really cool to circle back to that idea of classic Jane Foster coming back to Thor comics
She was
and
like his connection to actual
humanity.
humanity,
Yeah.
and she knew he was Thor.
Yep.
And it just sort of helped to even ground her again to be like, you are human, but a god, and you
Sure.
also have to go do godly things every once in a
Exactly.
while. And when he was gone, she was always thinking like, well, geez, I mean, will I ever be able to relate to that portion of him? You
Exactly.
know?
And even though, like, in the comics and even the movies, like, Donald Blake isn't really much of a thing anymore. It's still, they use reference it maybe a little bit here and there, but to see their relationship build and go new boundaries, I guess, in this epic run was really cool and just very thought provoking what Jason Aaron did with this.
Yeah, the Jane. So
We might get
Jane.
into spoiler territory for
Yeah,
those
we're
out
gonna
there.
we're gonna try to be really careful about this.
Yeah,
So,
but
but there's a few things
just
that people know. Number one, Jane became a doctor.
yes,
Number two, Jane got cancer,
yep.
and so she's actively fighting cancer. Um,
Which was pretty monumental in comics. I mean, it
yeah.
does happen. Like the Captain Marvel was one of the early
Hmm.
characters that they started addressing cancer with.
Hmm.
That was one of the big ones that I can think about. But there's a few characters, but Marvel really takes their time if they're going to address cancer. They're going to incorporate in the character. They're going to really take their time.
Yeah, and it has to be
It
meaningful.
has to be
So
meaningful.
for Jane, it's like that sort of emphasized the human frailty of
Yes.
her. So even though Thor is, as we've seen with the Gorr storyline, jumping millennia into the future,
Yeah.
there's always a Thor.
Yeah.
So you realize that Jane is kind of following, unfortunately, a path that most humans do take.
Right.
And meanwhile, back at Thor, he has part of another storyline where he becomes
Unworthy.
unworthy and he
Yeah.
loses
It's basically
the
that crisis of faith that he was going through in the movies. Well, it was kind of taken to an extreme in the
yeah.
comics. So
So
they
in the
kind of reeled
comics,
it
he
in a little
dropped
bit.
his hammer on the moon
Yeah.
and he couldn't pick it back up. The
Yeah. From
hammer would
original
not.
sin.
Yeah, original sin.
Ooh.
Another storyline, another whole
That
story.
was written by Jason Aaron as
Oh
well.
yeah, the whole run. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was one of his early Marvel events that he got to work
So it's
on.
kind of one of those things you should read
Should
with
read it?
it.
Does it?
Pick it
Do
up?
you need it? Or could you read it in a synopsis page? Probably.
Yeah.
But is it cool just to read it?
I thought I enjoyed
Yeah.
it. It was fine.
I think it's Steve Epting. I think that's how you pronounce it. He was
Yeah.
in the Captain America. He did the art for that series.
Oh, okay.
So he was super cool to just look at that art.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
so
it.
good.
I thought it was fine. I
Yeah.
read it. Some people didn't like it. I was like,
I thought
okay,
it
I'm
was I
fine
thought it
with
was
it.
good too. It
Yeah,
was good. It was like a spy story. It
yeah.
was kind
You
of
take it with
mystery, I guess.
it. They use that storyline in a lot of other storylines, so it's kind of nice to just have that
Yeah.
knowledge of it. So
Sure.
I would say look it up.
Yeah.
But so Thor drops his hammer on the moon and he can't pick it up, and he sits there for. There's like a story like for months or whatever. He keeps trying to
Yeah.
pick it up, and even Odin comes down, and like
He
all
can't
of
do it
Asgard
either.
comes up and says
Yeah.
like, "What is happening?" And
Almost that contest from the movie. They
yep,
kind of a little bit would work with
yeah,
that.
Milner would not accept that, and
Yes.
uh, that's so that's sort of like the trajectory of Thor. He became unworthy, and he needs to go figure out something else.
Absolutely.
And while the hammer is sitting on the moon quietly, um, Jane, you find, has been
It
teleported
calls
to
to
the
her.
moon. Yeah, it calls to her. Is teleported to the moon through the help of Heimdall, right?
I think it was
Uh,
more like Mjolnir did that its own.
to get her there.
Yeah,
Oh,
because I don't think it was all. Might maybe
like
Hemdall
maybe
did a
it's
little
a,
bit,
so then
but
she went and
you find
she
out Mjolnir throughout this run is more than what it is.
yes, and so she is called to it, goes to the moon and picks it up and
Yeah, which was like
becomes
the mighty Thor.
the mighty Lady Thor.
Yes. It was also cool during this point where Thor's mother, Lady Freya, becomes more of a main character as well.
Yeah,
Versus
she
just
had a
seeing
lot of
all
story.
Odin all the time. There was a
Yeah,
point where Odin disappears from the action, so she had become the All Mother, whoa, that was a big fundamental shift for
Yeah.
Asgard. And so when he comes back, there's this whole epic back and forth between who's right, who's wrong, and it gets it gets
Yeah.
intense.
And women and men and like,
Yeah,
where's the
absolutely.
paradigm shift and sort of kind of what's been happening a lot in movies and things too is just, there's this shared responsibility and this
It
shared
was a cool
leadership.
aspect to tackle, though.
Yeah.
Like
And why not throw it in? I mean, the story
she
needed
becomes
to
like
have
a
that.
integral supporting character in
Well,
the
like
whole big
with
thing.
Lady Thor taking
Yeah.
place of Thor.
Yeah, and it was
S-
such a cool,
Figure that.
having a male-dominated comic, like, bring forth Lady Thor
Yeah.
um, and like Thor's mother. So that was super cool to see that happen, and what new character dynamics can come out of it. So
So Lady Thor is a great character. A lot of people will reference the old What If comic from
yes,
when Jane Foster. It's like what if Jane Foster lifted the
yep,
hammer of Thor? It's
yep,
like
and they were
she
reprinted in
became
these
that.
volumes as well.
Yeah, and it's like, well, she looks pretty much how they did here. So
Yeah,
so it is another, I think it's just another call out to Marvel is that Marvel, of course, the Marvel writers know their history. They
yeah,
just know it.
absolutely.
And there's storylines out there and there's stories in between panels and stories where, characters disappear for a year and you're like, well, what happened during that year? Well, some
Exactly.
other writer in the future will figure that out.
Yeah.
So it is cool that they have these little spots that they can fill in. So this is one of them. Jane Foster lifts the hammer of Thor and it kind of changes the inscription on the hammer a little bit
Yep.
where it
Yeah.
says,
This whoever holds this hammer, if she be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. So
yeah.
it kind of adds that letter S to it. So that was pretty clever.
So now everyone's like, wow, so Thor's been out since the
Uh,
60s. Obviously, Thor is a very
oh
manly
yes,
themed character.
absolutely. And
And
this
boom.
is also the run where Russell Dodderman comes in.
Oh,
Yeah, and just defines the look of
a
Lady
different
Thor.
artist for that.
Yeah, so they do throughout the run. There's a couple different artists in, but Russell Dodderman, as much as a part as Assad Ribic was for the Gorr the God Butcher run, um, Russell Dodderman is the guy for this run.
Yeah.
His art is so well thought, again, very concise and well thought out, but it gives some room to breathe and just brings out the dynamics and Jane Foster.
Well, and so for Jane, like I said, we won't really ruin the storyline because the storyline is good. Um,
Yes,
but Jane immediately realizes that not only is she incredibly strong as Thor, not only is she not even human anymore, she can do all sorts of
yes,
crazy, cool God stuff and fly through space and everything else, but she doesn't have cancer when she's Thor.
yes.
And then on top of it, she realizes there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that title. And is she going to be accepted in Asgard? Is she going to be accepted anywhere?
Sure, and she
You
has to
know,
fight for that equality.
like every
Like
step of it. Yeah.
every quality, that respect throughout the realm, in her own realm of Asgard, trying to establish some connections with Earth and Midgard, um, and trying to help out the 10 realms. You find out,
Yeah.
not just the 9. There's a 10th one. Jason Aaron comes up with.
So then
But
you
yeah,
realize if she goes back and tells anyone that she's a human, that I'm Jane Foster, that they'll immediately just say, "Oh, well then you're not, you're just a placeholder," right?
yes.
So that's kind of relatively kept secret through the
Yeah,
run.
through I would say about
Almost
half the
till the
run,
yeah,
half of the it's 8 volume
everyone just
run.
sees a new Thor and they're like, "Wow, this must be a new god." And the nice part of it is she does keep her human uh,
Qualities.
perspective. Yeah, I
Yes,
guess on things.
absolutely.
So she's like, well, I'm going to use this power to help. I'm going to use this power to fight battles and make things right
Sure.
and bring awareness and
Yeah,
bring issues
exactly.
up.
And at the beginning of this run and this part of the run, she's fighting to like hold her claim as Thor because everybody's trying to take her hammer away from
Mm,
her, trying to stop her at all costs, and she has to rise above that and prove to them that she is worthy
yeah.
when all others in the realm are not. Clearly.
So here's my question for you.
Okay.
Who what name another character you think that could be Thor?
Like outside of like
No, like anyone in Marvel. What would be a fun Thor? Like a
what would
fun.
be a fun Thor?
I
Um,
have a guy in mind.
we already seen Captain America
Yeah,
like just
yeah,
hold the hammer. Um, like Wolverine, yeah, that's kind of on the nose.
yeah.
Um, that's a tough one. Maybe Cole, not Colson, that'd be too cheap.
No, you're thinking, you're thinking. All right, here's
Yeah,
my thought.
let me think on it a little bit.
Like 90s Gambit. Like
90s
what if
Gambit.
he had the hammer? Like he would be number one. I
Okay.
mean, think about that. So
Hmm.
he still has his kinetic.
Yeah.
He would still have his kinetic mutant energy.
Hmm.
And I think with Thor, he could be like a total like party goer, smooth guy, like all the way
Just
through.
crack thunder.
Yeah, it'd be like a like
Enhances energy
yeah,
powers.
right. Like I
Okay.
think that would be a
Okay.
wacky. I think he
Um,
could really jump into it.
I know like Wiccan of like Wiccan and
Yeah,
Hulkling
yeah.
of like the Younger Avengers. He was like his costume was basically like cosplaying Thor. That'd be cool if he could actually hold it. Yeah,
That's cool.
because he has like magic powers because he's one of the children of Scarlet Witch.
So like if it was someone who already had powers and then took the hammer, I was like, it would just emphasize all of
Yeah,
that.
I mean, there's always times where like Spider-Man gets to like
Yeah.
parody and like lift it for like a second.
And like sometimes everyone
Frog
gets
Thor, there's
there you
Frog
go.
Thor. That'd be cool if they gave like a little cameo to him. If we got like alligator Loki, we can get that. We can
I don't know.
get
I heard that there wasn't going to be multiverse Thors in the movie, but we'll see. We'll see.
that.
They might
I don't
surprise
know.
us. How could they not?
If they're going the way that they are in Doctor Strange 2,
Yeah, yeah.
we're gonna get there. So why not take the opportunity?
If it's already convoluted, just throw it in. Just throw it all
Why
in.
not?
Just make it as crazy as possible.
Absolutely.
So the story continues with Lady Thor, and it's actually regarded as one of the best runs of some comics within the last 10 years. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's very well received in the comic book community. It's really, really well done. It's not just like a girl for a girl's sake kind of thing.
No.
It's really
Addressing real
seriously
issues.
thought out. Yeah.
Real thought-provoking issues.
Yeah. And even the issues of, when she becomes Thor, what happens to your human body? If you're transforming, is there still a human body that's somewhere waiting for you or doing like are
Absolutely.
you transforming this energy and now you totally
And I mean,
becoming something else?
she there. The big long game is there's a war of the realms, and she's trying to help fight that or prevent it. Doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
But that's where Jason Aaron's run ultimately is trying to build towards is the war of the realms. And it's great that he started and even kept ties from his first issues of Thor and was able to interweave those through the whole run and just make it one cohesive like epic quest.
Well, I really like that he kept going back to the idea that once you are an Asgardian or once you are, across the Rainbow Bridge, that you're part of the realms. Like this
Yeah.
isn't just you. And if you're Thor, you need to pay attention to all of the realms. And if
Yeah.
you're Odin, you need to pay attention to all the realms. If you're Loki, you
Right.
pay attention to all the realms. There's a certain level of God that you reach that your your immediate concerns are not just
Yeah.
your tiny little
That's
house.
what Odin was doing. Like
Right.
he's like, I'm looking after my realm first,
Right.
and I'm gonna ignore everyone else.
And so, Thor, Lady Thor was
No,
like,
Jane, yeah.
"No, there's more out there
Yeah.
that needs to pay attention to. There's people
Exactly.
everywhere that need our
Just
help."
the dynamics and there. I mean, it addresses like political issues within Asgard and things like that. But just he really does a job of going in depth and addressing different parts of the realm, and just he thinks about it all and how they're relating to the Avengers and things like that. What can be done? They address like environmental issues with Roxxon Oil Company.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a really cool like real world like how does Jane Foster and Thor interact with this?
Well, I think the most important thing too is now that there is a Thor doing Thor things, what happens to the original Thor?
Yes.
What's his side story and how can
Yeah.
he still find
Which
relevance?
is interesting that you say it as a side story because
Yeah.
she becomes the main character.
Like she
basically.
takes over the title and
Yeah.
Thor kind of pops in every once in a while. Like,
Yeah.
Jane, you can't do that.
Right.
And
It's not until like the end of the run, the initial run, that you're like, oh,
yeah,
okay,
like you
she's
really
involved.
see
Yeah.
like, okay, he needs to figure out where's his place now. And that I think is going to be the main topic in the movie too, because it already shows us in the trailers that, Chris Hemsworth Thor is like wanting to be back to the
Yes.
original Thor. Like he wants his old hammer. He keeps calling to it. And he keeps trying to think like, oh, I'll be okay. I'll get back to where I was. And, there comes a point in any comic and any movie where the character has just moved beyond that. That's it. It's moved beyond that,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see kind of how the director and the writers were able to condense this big epic like 20 volume run
Yeah.
into about 2.5 hours,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
And then have time for all their little fun, like
Sure, like
improv stuff.
this could have been 2 hours. This could have been two movies. This could have
Yeah.
been three movies. You could have made this super big, and who knows? There's so much potential for this run to keep going, and we never know what they plan to do.
Well, once they opened it up where you can cross realms in the movie, you're like, oh my
Realms,
gosh, this is
multiverse, time
forever.
travel.
Yeah.
You
It's
basically
everywhere.
there's so much opportunity to be had to explore in these comics.
So I would say this reinvigorated the character. If you can find your run of it, even digitally or at your library or
The omnibus,
used bookstores,
yeah,
it is definitely a great run.
Absolutely.
Jason Aaron's The
Yeah.
Mighty Thor.
and if he's also written other titles such as Doctor Strange, Wolverine, and he's continuing to be one of the great not up and coming. He's kind of like now a staple of the Marvel.
Yeah, he's already there.
Marvel Comics now. He's gonna continue to write.
He's
epic
not a
runs.
rookie.
He's writing Avengers right now, and I got to meet him at C2E2 a couple of years ago, and he was such a nice guy. So if you ever see him at a con, go approach him, read some comics, and tell him how much you love him.
Tell him you heard the podcast.
Tell him you heard Bam Pow Comic Hour. And, yeah, such a cool guy. So this has been another great episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy the movie, and we'll see you next time. This is Andrew Bonner
And Chris Ramos.
signing off.